Okay, in this video we're going to have a little bit of a look at some of the benefits of promoting growing sustainable growth and the impact that it can have on the unemployment rate, growth in real incomes, and the increased ability that allows the government in terms of providing essential services. So in terms of why we promote economic growth is essential to provide employment for an expanding workforce, and that's why it's important for growth to be strong, so we can increase employment at a rate faster than our participation is increasing, or the size of our labour force. Healthy production levels help to provide goods and services to meet and allow for improved material living standards, and they can also help to increase our export growth. So to start off with, we'll talk about growth in real income. So growth in production typically means that there's a growth in income. So when we produce more, people will generate more in income in terms of wages and dividends and interests, because there's more demand for factors of production. Because if you do the circular flow model, more production leads to increased demand for resources, which leads to flow on to increased incomes. This higher income allows citizens to have greater purchasing power and higher material living standards, and that helps to boost our economic growth and our quality of life as well. And that can lead to improved non-material living standards for many reasons. The first one being that if we've got increased income, that may lead to increased happiness. It may allow for increased freedom of expression. Often richer people experience benefits in terms of their self-esteem and the feeling of sort of making a difference within society because they've got access to better jobs. Helplessness and depression, despair and things like that are more prevalent in people that are excluded from the labour force. So higher incomes provide individuals with a greater capacity to be charitable as well. So you can't really give a lot of money to charity if you don't have a lot of money. So by getting access to good jobs and stronger economic growth, it also gives people that sense of feeling good about themselves because they can be philanthropic and give to charity, and that can improve the quality of life of others. In terms of growth in real incomes, we generally use the term GDP to measure total production volumes, but there's also another figure called gross domestic income, which is slightly different. It's pretty much exactly the same, but what we're trying to measure is the total income that we're getting from our volume of goods and services. It's related to the terms of trade, which we'll talk a little bit more about in Chapter 8. But basically, if our export prices are really high, that's not really reflected directly in the GDP figure, because remember when we're calculating real GDP, we take out the effect of increased prices. So the real GDP figures are kind of a bit misleading in terms of our overall income when we're getting a really good price for our exports, because it's not increased production, it's just increased income from that production. Now, we're getting a bit technical here, but increased the terms of trade will eventually lead to higher incomes for consumers and more investment and consumption spending, and that will generate more production. But the raw figures take out the effects of the initial increase in incomes we get from the high terms of trade. So basically, when commodity prices are high, the GDI will exceed GDP because we'll be generating so much income from the selling of those commodities. When the terms of trade is falling, GDP will exceed GDI. We'll talk about it a little bit more in class. The first reason why we promote growth is it promotes growth in real incomes because there's an increase in demand for those factors of production. Secondly, it helps to lower the unemployment rate. Increased economic growth means more production, which means more employment. Governments wish to avoid unemployment, mainly because it's a waste of resources, and it can have negative impacts on psychological well-being. High unemployment rates often lead to increased crime and social unrest as well. So another benefit of increased economic growth is it helps to lower the unemployment rate. Be mindful though, if economic growth will exceed the rate of growth in productivity, it will boost the derived demand for labour. So if we can increase production at a faster rate than we can increase productivity growth, we need more workers. If productivity growth exceeds the growth in economic growth, then even though we're producing more, we don't need more workers because the existing workforce is working faster. So if economic growth exceeds the rate of productivity, that will create more demand for jobs, and that will lead to increased employment in the economy. It's also worth noting that it is possible for countries to experience an increase in employment, but also experience more unemployment. So what I mean by that is, for a country to reduce their unemployment rates, they need to be able to create enough jobs, create enough extra production that caters for the fact that the labour force increases every year. So you've got to remember, in Australia, there's probably around 150,000 more people each year in the labour force, so looking for work, actively looking for employment. So unless we can create over 150,000 jobs, unemployment may still increase despite the fact that the number of people that have actually got a job has increased, purely by virtue of the fact there's more people in the labour force. So it is impossible for the total level of employment to increase and also the level of unemployment to increase because the total size of the labour force is bigger. So if the labour force size goes from 6 million to 8 million, we're probably going to have more people who are employed, but we'll also have more people unemployed. So the idea is we need to create enough jobs that caters for an expanding labour force so that the unemployment rate actually goes down. So countries need to grow at a rate fast enough to account for any increases in the size of their labour force. Unemployment worsens both material and non-material living standards, so it's important to ensure strong rates of economic growth to create enough jobs which will help people to share from the income that we're generating from that growth. Because more people have access to a factor income or access to a job where they can generate an income, which will help to boost their material living standards and welfare. Finally, increased economic growth helps the government to provide essential government services. So economic growth helps the government to generate more revenue. We generate more company tax because companies are making more revenue. There's more production, therefore more income. And when there's more income, we're generating more income tax. We're also experiencing higher GST because people are spending more. And that when we spend, we pay about 10% of most things in GST. So all these types of tax like GST, income taxes, payroll taxes that people pay when they work, and stamp duty when people buy property, all of that comes from economic growth. So that increased government revenue allows the government to spend more on things like hospitals and schools and infrastructure, so they can update our roads or rails, they can update telecommunications networks, and these help to boost our material living standards because it should help to boost the quality of our human and physical capital. So the government's got more money to train people, people have therefore got better skills, and therefore they're able to generate more income. Faster telecommunications, lower production costs, they should lead to lower prices for people. So by allowing the government to generate more revenue, they've got more money to spend in things like infrastructure and hospitals, which allows for a healthier workforce, which boosts their material living standards, and also helps to boost telecommunications and infrastructure, which helps to lower prices. And finally, stronger rates of economic growth also help to improve the living standards of the less fortunate because we've got more money from taxpayers to spend on welfare and transfer spending and other essential services. So the increased tax revenue can be used to reduce poverty, reduce homelessness, help with drug addiction, help with things like problem gambling, alcoholism, smoking. Money can be put towards Indigenous issues that are happening in Indigenous communities, whether that may be, it could be, as serious as sexual assaults and things like that that are happening within Indigenous communities. If the government's got more money, they can educate and provide more resources for helping some of those problems. Violence against women, violence against crime, all of these things still rely on government funds, and the more money the government's got, the more money they can put towards tackling these issues within society, which has a big impact on boosting our non-material living standards. So to sum up, economic growth is critical for helping the government to provide government services which can boost both material living standards and non-material living standards. Strong economic growth is needed to reduce unemployment so that we grow at a rate faster than our labour force is growing, so we can reduce unemployment, and it also helps to boost real incomes within the economy.